Thank you for joining me today. My name is Natalie Rosales, and I will be talking about applying violin fundamental skills to advanced repertoire. Let me share my screen. Okay, hope you can all see that. Here is the link to the paper. Should anybody want to view it as we go through, let me send that through the chat. Okay, great. Well, let's get started. As I said, I'm Natalie Rosales, and this is my lecture for applying violin fundamentals to advanced repertoires. So to begin, there are 4 fundamental categories of learning the violin or any kind of music. Well, violin, sorry. There is left hand, right hand, aural skills, and music reading. So just to further define each of these categories, left hand skills incorporates body positioning, instrument positioning, and everything with left hand shape to chromatic alterations, moving each finger within. Right hand deals with the bowing arm, the movement of it, as well as the bow hold shape. And aural skills deals with the identification of notes and rhythms outside of reading the music. And music reading focuses on the literacy of the students and identifying music symbols and what they mean. For the purposes of this lecture, we will be focusing on left hand and right hand skills. Left hand fundamentals, the ones we will be focusing on is finger patterns and chromatic alterations. So finger patterns, what are they? Well, they are the hand shapes that dictate the pattern of notes that the violinist plays. As you see in the image below, these are the patterns of the fingers set on the strings. We have the first finger pattern, also called 1-2 finger pattern, and they make this shape with the hand. Let me find this image right here. As you can see, the notes that are played in this first finger pattern on the A string are B, C natural, D, and E, with a half step occurring within these first 2 notes. The second finger pattern, excuse me, more people entered the waiting room. There we go. The second finger pattern is labeled, well, all of these finger patterns are labeled by the fingers that have the half steps. So in this second finger pattern, the fingers that have the half steps between them are the second and third. As you can see in the image, the notes that are played are B, C sharp, this time D, and E. In finger pattern number 3, the half step occurs between the third finger and the fourth finger, as seen here. This finger pattern, well, actually, yes. Finger pattern number 4 includes a low one, which is simply the one placed below the normal positioning. Sometimes we will refer to this as half step, but in this case, this would be B flat, C natural, D, and E natural. If you notice, in this finger pattern, there are no half steps, only whole steps. Finger pattern number 5 also includes a low one, but there is a half step between third finger and fourth finger. With this system of finger patterns, this is called the Bornoff fingering system. And there are several different methodologies, but for this essay lecture, we will be discussing this. So which order do string instruments learn them in? Well, if we take a look at this image, if you let your hand just rest like this, as in the picture, you can see that there are natural half steps between second and third and fourth fingers. And the first finger just kind of rests. This is, as the picture shows, a native hand position. And if we put this on the strings, it would naturally be placed on the E, C sharp, well, E on the D string, C sharp on the A string, D on the A string, and B flat on the E string. This determines which finger pattern we teach beginning students first. Since the second finger pattern features this half step between second and third, it is much easier for students to place a natural hand position and only move the fourth finger a little bit higher for that whole step in between third and fourth. From there, we proceed to first finger pattern with a half step between 1 and 2, third finger pattern with a half step between 1 and 4. In this case, I believe fifth finger pattern because that half step still remains, and then fourth since there is a whole step between each note. To teach these finger patterns for beginning violinists and beginning string instruments, we often use finger markers, which are either tapes or stickers. Now, I can't show you that on my instruments, but what they look like is they indicate the first finger, third finger, and sometimes the second in the 2-3 finger pattern with that half step between third and the fourth finger. This helps the violinists learn where to place their fingers and to develop that muscle memory. This also will guide future chromatic alterations for the students and allow them to visualize those half step changes between each finger. Another finger pattern teaching strategy is descending scales. And this is an idea from Mr. Gillespie. And it starts with a scale from the highest notes going down. This descending motion focuses on placing the finger patterns all together and removing each finger. For example, if I do a D major scale, 1 octave in first position, I would start with 3 fingers down for the D on the A string and remove each finger. With this particular scale, the most challenging aspect would be placing the fourth finger on a different string, which is why it is a good exercise for beginning instrumentalists, because it allows them to reform the hand shape after they have already taken off the finger patterns. Another similar exercise is descending melodies, where you take a melody that has mostly descending lines and again focus on reshaping that finger pattern. In this case, if I play Mary Had a Little Lamb, then I would start with 2 fingers on the A string if it's an A major. In the first half, we take off the 2 fingers, and then we place it again in the same finger pattern to go up. Just like descending scales, this is a good strategy for reforming the finger pattern. The most challenging of these teaching strategies is the Gimignani chord. And this chord replicates the perfect left hand structure. It begins with your first finger on A on the G string, second finger F sharp on the D string, third finger D on the A string, and fourth finger B on the E string. As you can see, my hand is still curved. My fingers still form that tabletop shape, which is the proper left hand shape to reinforce for beginning students. Now we will begin analyzing the Bach Partita number 3 in E major Preludio and the finger patterns in this piece. As you can see in the picture, I have provided fingerings for each position that this passage is in. We begin first in 5th position with the G sharp on the A string and the 4th finger on the D string, excuse me. As you can see, this is the finger pattern we would use. With the D sharp, it would be the half step between D sharp and E, the 3rd and 4th fingers, leading to the 3-4 finger pattern. Since we stay in the same position, we simply move the D to D natural in measure 19, changing the finger pattern from 3-4 to 3-2. Once we shift back down, the finger pattern then becomes 1-2 with a half step in between 1-2. We shift again, finger pattern 2-3, shift again, and it's the same finger patterns repeating throughout the passage. So how would we teach this passage using beginner strategies? Well, first, we would identify the finger patterns used, which we have just done. And one method we could use is practicing the Gimignani chord for the hand shape in the upper positions. First, we start by placing all fingers, and we simply place them across all 4 strings. In this case, to practice what the left hand shape would feel like with other finger patterns, we can simply alter a pitch and move fingers. Well, it's difficult vertically. And move fingers between the strings to practice the changing hand shapes, especially as we shift. Chromatic alterations. What are they? They are deviations from the original finger patterns. With the finger patterns, they are usually shown as one entire hand unit, with all fingers being placed at the same time. Well, chromatic alterations is the individual finger movement that occurs either within the hand shape, within the finger pattern, or without some of the fingers placed. This is the independence of the finger that needs to be developed. And chromatic alterations are necessary for whenever it is a quick passage and you do not have time to place all of the fingers at the same time. Some teaching strategies for chromatic alterations include playing 2 strings at the same time in an exercise called doubling up. And this includes 1 or more fingers down on the string, practicing moving each finger individually. If I were to play D on the E string with the open A and choose to change the E from E to E flat, indicating a low 1, this exercise helps me to keep a finger down and move it individually. Add a note is similar to the descending scale strategy that we have seen before, except we start at a scale and we go backwards, adding 1 note at a time. In this case, if we start with a C major scale, we go from C down to B and back to C. And the next time we add a note going to A. If we add 1 more, in this exercise, you practice adding individual fingers rather than the entire unit. And my personal favorite, anchor and slide and anchor and tap go hand in hand. And this is when you set down at least 3 fingers and you move 1 individually. The anchor and slide allows you to slide in between the notes to practice the movement. And once that is established, anchor and tap practices lifting the finger movement and placing it in the same spot it was sliding to. In my next excerpt from the Kabalevsky Violin Concerto, we will see this finger independence, starting at rehearsal 26 for 4 measures. As you can see, starting in this measure, it goes from double stops with G and B natural, and E natural, to G and B flat, and B flat to E flat, excuse me. In this hand shape, we start with low 2 G on the G string, and first finger on B natural and E flat, sorry, B natural and E natural on the A and D strings. Each measure requires you to change not the second finger, but the first finger back. And this independent movement of the fingers is what one needs to practice. Some recommended strategies to practice this are, again, anchor and slide and anchor and tap. Because when we are playing this excerpt, the first finger moves back and forth, similar to these exercises. To start, one should keep the first finger anchored on the string, second finger anchored on the string, while the first finger slides back and forth to get that motion. Once that motion is properly established, then one may proceed to lifting up the finger and practicing that same movement. Let's move forward to right hand skills now. And the right hand skills we will be focusing on today are bow hold and right hand shape, direction changes, and string crossings. Bow hold and right hand shape. So what is the function of the bow hold? Well, the bow hold controls the bow, which is the primary means of sound production on the violin. Most of our sound comes from the bow playing the violin. Of course, there is some left hand strategy that we can do, such as left hand pizz or pizzicato. But when it comes to the bow, it's all the right hand. Each particular finger has a function in the bow hold. The second finger and thumb, which must always be curved and relaxed, serve as a basic balance and motor control of the bow. Without these two guiding it, you cannot have the same amount of movement or balance. The first finger controls the bow placement on the violin. So if I move the first finger towards me, it moves the bow. And if I move it away, it moves the bow back. This is similar to the reins of a horse. When in a horse-drawn carriage, it changes the direction of the horse. The third finger controls the direction and angle of a bow. Just like the first finger moves the placement, the third finger can refine the angle and direction of a bow. Also, when completing bow changes, the second and third finger combined are what establish that, well, that was a bad example, but establish the bow change. And the fourth finger acts as a counterbalance for the frog. If the fourth finger isn't there, the bow falls into my hand, which is why a proper relaxed and curved shape of the hand is necessary at all times. So how can we teach right hand shape? So one example would be to have a pencil. In this case, I'll just use my bow and reform the bow shape on the pencil. This will allow the students to practice the bow hold without risk of adding the weight and deforming the hand shape. Another good object to use would be a straw, as a straw could bend with the pressure if a student is pressing with the thumb. And another good exercise would be balance point bowing. Since the weight of the frog is no longer solely on the pinky, it is much easier for the student to play using a proper bow hold shape and establish that before moving it back and adding the weight of the frog. Direction changes. So what are they? Well, they are the changing of the bow on the string, either from down bow to up bow. Why are they important? Well, the type of finger motion determines the style of the bow stroke, as well as the tone quality of the sound. And to do them, Your right arm moves from big muscle to small muscle. First from opening up the elbow and then moving the forearm, circling the wrist, and having loose fingers to control the fine motions. As you watch, you will see me move the elbow first, forearm, wrist, and then fingers. Some direction change strategies include putting a pencil inside the bow tip, for example, my finger. This will allow the student to practice the flexible hand motions and wrist motions while not having the instrument to distract with the sound or the weight of the bow on the instrument. The pencil can be placed in line with the instrument or just in front. Hang gliding on the bow is similar to this, except instead of the pencil or the bow moving on the pencil, the bow moves in the left hand. To do this one, the left hand comes across the upper bout, holds the bow in the left hand, and the right hand practices moving while retaining that bow hold shape. This allows for the fingers to practice being flexible while changing directions on the bow. To refine that finger motion, we would use drawing with the frog, in which the right hand is curved with a proper bow hold shape and only the fingers move. If I want to draw a cat, I start with the head and the ears and the whiskers and the body and the tail. And I hope you could see that amazing painting I just drew. But this is a fun strategy for students to practice moving the fingers in any direction. Finger flexes incorporates the bow on the string while focusing on the flexibility. By simply drawing a down bow and stopping the bow, you can practice the hand shape and check for flexibility at random times. Flex the fingers up and down. Flex them up and down. Up and down. Up and down. And this changes from each part of the bow, which is why it is necessary to stop at random spots. In this passage, which is from the Bach Partita number 3, this focuses on the direction changes since there are no slurs or hooked bowings, any other kind of articulation in this passage. Some recommended strategies to practice this détaché stroke. Well, first, identify the bow stroke, and in this case, it is détaché. And what I used in my own practice was to draw with the frog, especially since it's been a while since I've really refined this motion. You can draw your name in cursive or draw the cat like I just presented. Use the pencil bow tip, which does practice this opening of the arm, as well as a changing of the strings, and finger flexes, which again provides that flexibility. String crossings are the changing of the bow from one string to the next. For example, changing from the D to the A string. To do string crossings, it focuses more on the elevator motion of the arm, the shoulder, and then whenever it's a quicker bow string crossing, from the forearm. For example, in this passage, my arm goes up and down. But if I'm doing quick string crossings, it is mostly forearm motion. There are arm levels, different arm levels for each strings. We have an arm level for the G string, D, A, and E. As you can see, E is the lowest, G is the highest. Now, when you have a student, it is important to make sure the shoulder does not raise when doing any of these. It simply comes from the elbow, the arm joint, excuse me, the shoulder joint. In between those, we have pairs of string placements. For example, the first would be G to D, which is halfway between the G and the D string. D and A, which is halfway between the D and the A string, and A and E, which is halfway between the A and the E string placement. Some great strategies that I love to use are first bridge rocks, which help the student practice the arm levels going back and forth as well as jumping strings. In this exercise, the student merely places a bow on a string and moves their arm up and down for each string or pair of strings without making a sound. Furthermore, a pencil crossing, again, utilizes the pencil and allows students to actually bow and practice that motion before adding it on the strings. And when the student is ready to add the strings back into the passage, then you can add a rest in between to practice that arm motion. Rest, rest. And when the student is ready, they can take out the rests and perform it again with a proper arm motion. Another thing about string crossings that complicates it is when slurs are added. In this passage, the Bach partita number 2 in D minor, Gigue, we see these slurs and how they affect string crossings. In this first, you need to identify the strings that are involved in the string crossings. Mostly it is D, A, and E strings in this passage. Then identify where the slurs are located. Since there are slurs in this passage, first, one must take them out and practice the individual string crossings, again, using bridge rocks and open string practice. First, practicing the arm motion, and then adding back the open strings without the distraction of without the distraction of the slur, yes, and the left hand. And then once you feel comfortable doing the slurs, you may add the left hand notes back in. This next excerpt also showcases the movement of the bow in a slur from the G string, the lowest of the instrument, to the E string, and then back. As you can see, my bow goes from the G string to D, to A, to E on a separate bow. I would use the exact same process to practice this. First, identifying the strings, identifying any slurs in articulation and removing them, adding them back in once that motion is established, and then with the open strings, and then adding the left hand notes back in. For our last excerpt, we will go back to the Bach partita number 3 in E major, Preludio, to see a different kind of string crossing in this excerpt. This excerpt, again, focuses on the D, A, and G strings. However, this excerpt features something also different, which is called variolage, which is a string crossing pattern. In this case, the bow goes from D string to A, back to D, to G, and then back to D again. This, whenever you focus on certain strings, pairs of strings at a time, for example, D and A, if you notice my hand, it makes a circle that goes clockwise from my point of view. When going from the D string to the G string, the pattern goes the opposite way, forming a figure 8 when put together. Since there are no more slurs to deal with in this passage, I would again recommend using open strings for this, combining both the singular direction, going the opposite direction, and then combining them as I have just shown. And then when the instrumentalist feels ready, adding the left hand notes back in. So that concludes the lecture portion. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, I do believe we are out of time. Let's see. It's time. Oh, I do believe we have about 7 minutes remaining in the Zoom time for any questions. And you can either ask them through speaking or through the chat. There we go. Any questions? No? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today and celebrating this lecture recital, and I hope you learned something important about string education. Thank you so much. Bye. Should I go ahead and end it? Yeah. Okay.
Did you want to say that?
Yeah, I do actually. Okay.